Look, I'm saying the world is far more fantastic. The universe is far, far more fantastic than it appears, and that really anyone thinks. I'm saying that it is thought, that this is the mind of God. Tiny, tiny, tiny part of it. But that this vast, infinite universe is a construction of God in God's mind. That this is mind stuff. That what the scientist in fact finds as he analyzes what matter is made of, if you like, is increasingly something more like thought than what he felt was matter. I'm saying that you can't have a single thought in your head, but that it comes from God. That there isn't a single atom that remains in existence but for God thinking of it. That the whole thing is a bit like a film. You have no idea, watching the film, that the film is made and how it's made and who made it and in what circumstances and the culture behind the story that devised the, you've no idea of any of it. All you know is you're experiencing the film. And all you know is that you're experiencing life in this colourful, amazing, almost unintelligible dimension. That's all you know. And your mind is full of ideas, thoughts, which has sort of come to you from your experience of being in this, finding you're in this dimension of living. And among those thoughts are some thoughts about hopes and fears and desires and values and your reflection on your experience. And in those include hopes, things you trust and things you don't, things you believe, things you don't. This is the richness of your experience, which you might classify as inner experience. It's the only experience you can have, is what you have made of and what you continue to make of. The signals and information that comes in to your being, to your thought, from the experience you're having of living. And among those hopes can be hopes of God, wonderful God. And among those hopes can be hopes of finding such, being favourably in relation with such God. None of these thoughts, none of them, none of the experience and none of the data, none of the cause of the data can exist but for something beyond, as you see it, your consciousness and your ability to control and understand. In short, you take it as experience, simply something that's happening to you. It's something you find you have. And sure, you can play with it and make all sorts of things with it, and do. Both in terms of objects and buildings and articles, and in terms of theories and ideas and beliefs and structures, ways of thinking of things and so forth. And in that incomplete understanding, we find a desire to strive for understanding, because understanding gives us mastery and helps us achieve the things that we hold to value from the experience we're having. So we try certain things, we taste good and evil, because we can't tell the difference. Or we think this is good, so we try and we find out, oh, that's not so good, that one. Don't want to taste that again, thank you very much. And we learn. Spiritually we learn. Or at least that's a way of thinking about it that we've gathered from our experience of being here. It might not be your way. I suspect you wouldn't survive very long if it wasn't, but I mean, I think, at least temporarily, you may be more cautious of testing things than other people and so on, and therefore simply do what you're used to doing always, rather more rigidly. You're more conservative in that sense, presumably because your experiences led you to believe this is probably the safest way to go, best way to go. Now, when I read John's Gospel, especially John 17, for instance, but not just John 17, but I'm taken with the emphasis on understanding God to be Father and what that might imply. And, well, I'm impressed with certain things, so I draw them closer to me. I sort of think, well, perhaps I should be focusing on this. I'm curious when it says, this is life eternal, to know thee, the only true God. How do you know God? Well, my God is at least good as I understand it, so it's whatever I see as good. I better focus on that way I get to know him. That would be my rationality, but in fact I'm just inspired by reading it for some reason. I think, wow, that's an original approach. To know God is life eternal. Well, presumably it's feasible. How is it feasible for most people? Well, even if you're not religious, you could still be grateful and thankful and appreciate the loveliness of nature and family and so on. Now, for some reason or other, that looks promising to me. Perhaps that doesn't look promising to you. I'm surprised. So perhaps it does look promising to you. Well, taste and see. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, what I'm talking about is a way of life. I'm not therefore talking about either a philosophy or a religion, but what I understand to be living to be. And perhaps you feel that both philosophy and religion attempt to do that, and they do, there's no question of it. But I don't seem to come to the same conclusions at all. It's a state of being, not to be identified with a way of living. Not to be identified by being a citizen or being a church member. You might be a church member or you might be a citizen or both. But that's not what it's about. It's the importance of a particular relationship with God, understanding him in the light of being Heavenly Father, and living according to what you truly love. focusing in on what you truly love. You know, keeping the first principle, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. Okay, loving your neighbour as yourself, the one that rescues you, as much as you love yourself. Doesn't seem to be much room for loving yourself if you're loving God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. Unless in some sense yourself is implied by loving God, because he loves you. So you do love yourself. I'm jumping the gun here, but in some sense we assume he's loving you as much as he's loving me. And perhaps anything else he's made. Perhaps it doesn't matter whether he's made it or not, that he still loves all that is. Perhaps all that is because of him anyway. Do you see it already in a few sentences? We're into an incredible peace, an incredible touch on the shalom, the peace, the fullness, the all-sufficiency of God, the all-encompassing of God, and his loveliness, true as we see it. And perhaps we see it clearer the more we focus in on it. Perhaps we don't, we shift on to something else, but that's not been my experience. Now, I don't mean it's the cause of, but I do mean that I find it is consistent with my values of being concerned for all life. And it's consistent in my mind with God too, being concerned for all life. My God, at any rate. That I find is consistent with going to all the world, preach the gospel to all creatures, not just all people, but all creatures. What's my gospel? My gospel is that God is who he is. The glory of God is quite something wonderful. And there's a great blessing from knowing him as your Heavenly Father. Perhaps I shouldn't have used the word knowing, believing, trusting, behaving as if, to see what the consequence of living that way does to you. And then you won't need to be persuaded. You will have found what you believe to be the case. I can envisage, can't I, that this trust becomes greater than any difficulty I might otherwise have been facing, and that somehow it dispels such difficulties in an astonishing way. In short, I find my philosophy an incredible blessing to me. I've said philosophy now, but I mean both words have bad connotations for me. In a sense, philosophy sounds cold and without God, and religion sounds as though it's with the wrong God. The judgmental and condemning and judging, well, let's not go into that. So I shift language onto new meanings too. Just as Religion has shifted the meanings of words. My way of life also shifts the meaning of words, at least to me. So the word happiness no longer is something frivolous or, not as on a par with words like joy, but has a purity in itself. Happiness, a lightness, that perhaps joy is a bit more hippie and, happiness is more like a butterfly and joy is more like an ocean. And peace is more like an ocean. I don't know. And the lovely thing is I don't need to know. That's a great relief. I'm not struggling over knowing. I'm not desperate now to find out more things. I'm not asking for it. In that day you will ask me nothing. Why? Because of the felt sufficiency of God simply being and to wonder at his presence. Love you, Heavenly Father. Thank you. Thank you, Heavenly